Hey everyone, how's it going? Stefan here. 8,000 years ago, Europe was undergoing a profound change, perhaps the most dramatic in its history. Farming groups who were the descendants of people who originated in Anatolia were slowly making their way north along the rivers of Europe. Not this river though, this is an American river.
I'll tell you what.
Despite the fact that they left us no written records, what can we tell about the daily lives of people who lived during this period of really profound and dramatic change? Let's talk about that today. So let's take a look at the lives of these farmers, and why not start with their houses? These early farming communities introduced architecture to Europe on a scale not yet seen. If you were alive back then, you would have lived in a rectangular house with possibly stone foundations and mud brick or clay walls. There was probably just the one room, so privacy would have been a struggle. Though some houses may have had 2 floors and multiple rooms, but definitely one room was the most common. The image you're seeing on the screen is of a house excavated at Nea Nicomedia in Greece, one of the earliest farming villages on mainland Europe. Some of these houses were isolated farmsteads, but others arranged themselves into villages of hundreds of people. Your hearth could have been inside or outside of your house, but regardless of where your hearth was, these houses frequently burnt down, so frequently it was perhaps deliberate. The Neolithic farmers that lived in them would simply flatten these burnt down buildings and build over them. Over time, this constant leveling and rebuilding of houses created little artificial hills with the village perched on top. In archaeology, these are called tells, and in Europe they can reach around 10 meters tall maximum. But over in the Near East, where farming communities had already been established for thousands of years, they can be as tall as 50 meters. Some of these are huge. In a way, tells are sort of habitation monuments. We can imagine that in the minds of the inhabitants, these tells really signified their ownership of the land. That this was their land, inhabited by their ancestors, as proven by their very homes that were built on top of homes that were built on top of homes of their ancestors, so on back through time. Fortunately for archaeologists, these tells are very distinctive, and it gives us a really clear example of just how far this culture extended. The northernmost tell discovered so far is in Polgar Soshalom in northern Hungary. There's no way I said that right. I'm sorry, Hungary. I'll make it up to you later. That's quite a distance really. Farming spread from Knossos in Crete to Hungary in just 1,000 years. The culture and economic system underlying these villages must have been very stable. Many existed undisturbed for 2,500 years. They contained religious buildings, arranged themselves into political groupings, and some would eventually become walled or fortified. It's no surprise that Europe's earliest urban centers would evolve in Greece and the Balkans. So who would have been living in your house on top of great-granddad's old house? Well, you probably would have had quite a large family. Farming and the arrival of sedentary lifestyles saw the emergence of the demographic pattern that really defines pre-industrial societies. Lots of babies being born, lots of people dying young. To feed this large family, you'd be growing crops on the banks of your local river, such as einkorn wheat, barley, peas, lentils, and chickpeas. I've got to pause the video here for a second. I'm making it sound like an episode of Escape to the Bloody Country. Life as one of these farmers would have been really hard. Imagine having to do every single thing by hand. Sowing the seeds, preparing fields, harvesting, processing the grains, turning them into bread, with nothing, not even metal, to help make cutting things easier. Extremely tough, extremely tough living. Though there is some evidence from the central Balkans that they were beginning to use cattle to help them pull things, still, that probably would have been the absolute cutting edge of agricultural technology at that time. Hard bloody life, I tell you, I wouldn't last 5 minutes. Anyway, back to the video. If you lived in Greece or Bulgaria, you'll be supplementing that diet with sheep and goats, with maybe 10% of your meat coming from pigs. If you lived in the central Balkans, you'll still be eating plenty of goats, but cattle would play a much more prominent role. Life isn't just a series of isolated tasks and animals, though. The interaction between man and farm and the seasons creates a rhythm or music to life. As Dmitry Mlakuj puts it,
by performing tasks, we are alert to the conditions and changes in the environment, such as weather or the ebb and flow of rivers, adjusting actions accordingly. We attend animals, are aware of their own tasks or bodily rhythms, and we also resonate with plants and their growth cycles. Similarly, plants and animals respond to the actions of people and their rhythms, creating a sociality that transcends the species boundary.
Plants would be sowed in the autumn, spring the fields weeded and new animals born. In the summer, crops were harvested and processed for the long winter ahead. The fields would have to be manured and prepared for sowing again in the autumn. We can imagine that these farmers would be instinctively attuned to the rhythms of nature in a way that me in 2019 can only dream of being. Each season bringing with it unique challenges and its own celebrations. When you're not looking after your farm, or perhaps instead of being a farmer at all, you may have had a specialist skill such as weaving or pottery. The advent of domesticated animals and crops such as flax really probably would have expanded the types of clothing you could wear, not just fur and skins anymore. You could have had some nice woolly knickers, but unfortunately woolly knickers don't leave much of an archaeological trace, so there's not much to say about that. Pottery, on the other hand, we have tons of it, and this was the first time it was introduced to Europe. The pottery of the Neolithic was not made in every village. Right from the beginning, it was a specialist skill. Each pot would have been carefully produced by the hands of the potter. Potter's wheel had not yet been invented. Depending on where you lived, you might make it in a certain style. From the south of Greece, red and black pottery is for you. Central Balkans preferred to add a little white paint to theirs. Adriatic coast, impresso ware marked with the shells of cockles would decorate your lovely one-room shack. Clay pots would have been essential for cooking and storing food. Imagine a world without pots to cook in. There'd be no stew whatsoever. That's not a world I want to live in, guys and gals. I'm all about that stew life. Unsurprisingly, therefore, these pots would be traded far and wide, as far as 200 kilometers in some cases, and were probably beloved by the farmers and also the Mesolithic hunters that they traded with. From across Southeast Europe, female clay figurines dominate symbolic expression, and it's the sort of clearest physical and symbolic example of these folks' Anatolian origins. Of course, we don't know exactly what these clay figurines represented. Female gods, self-portraits, toys, all of the above. What is particularly interesting, though, is that the Anatolian ancestors of these farmers devoted a huge amount of effort to constructing large monuments, which are entirely absent from Greece and the Balkans. If these small figurines do represent the sort of religion and spirituality of these people, then somewhere along the road from Anatolia to Europe, their forms of spiritual representation hugely decreased in scale. Life isn't all work and woolly knickers, though. You probably would have had plenty of opportunity for some adventure. First and foremost, they almost certainly had alcohol, so you could have got pissed with your mates at the seasonal festivities. You may even get the opportunity to leave your village. Farming spread by Neolithic communities founding colonies further and further along river valleys. It's difficult to say exactly why this happened, but again, it's probably down to demographic pressure. Your old village may have grown to a point where it was difficult to sustain the population with the farming methods you had to hand. Heading further up rivers to new sites would have relieved a lot of pressure and maybe reduced conflict, unless you ran into some unfriendly hunter-gatherer groups. We know that not all hunter-gatherers were unfriendly, though. At Lepensky Vir in Serbia, there's an excellently preserved hunter-gatherer village on the Danube. dated to around 6000 BCE, that really captures the moment of interaction between new farming communities and older hunter-gatherer groups. From analyzing the skeletal remains of the people buried there, 10 of the skeletons were non-local, probably of Neolithic farmers, and 9 out of those 10 skeletons were probably women. So, if you were a woman in a Neolithic farming group, you may well up sticks and marry a hunter-gatherer. Finally, you could have also gone on expeditions for resources, particularly obsidian. Obsidian was highly prized in the Neolithic for the production of stone tools. However, not every region had access to quality stone. 2 regions that had great stone, though, were the island of Melos in Greece and the Tokai region of Hungary. Tokai is not just a great place to mine your obsidian, alright? Also produces delicious wines. They're golden, they're unique, they're sweet. Forgive me for saying all the names wrong. Buy Hungarian wine. Thank you. Communities would have traveled for over 100 kilometers to mine or trade for obsidian. This would be an expedition that probably would have taken several weeks through mountains, along rivers, or in the case of Melos, across the sea. We can only imagine the challenges groups of miners and traders faced to get these resources, and perhaps their joy at securing something that was so valuable and necessary for their survival. On the other hand, that might just be me romanticizing the past. No doubt, some love traveling, some love staying at home, just like people do now. So would you have ever needed to use your fancy Melos tools for war? After the Neolithic, in Bronze Age Europe, warfare was widespread, organized, involving thousands of people. It's probably unlikely that this appeared out of nowhere, so what evidence for warfare do we have at 6000 BCE in this region? Some villages are enclosed by ditches. For example, again, Nea Nicomedia is encircled by not only 1 but 2 earthen banks. However, enclosures and walls aren't always for defensive purposes. They could have had symbolic reasons for enclosing their village. As for any weapons, again it depends on the interpretation. Axes and arrows can be used to hunt and work wood, or kill someone. However, it should be noted that Neolithic people consumed a lot more domesticated animals than wild ones. You would have very rarely gone hunting. So, what were they using all these arrowheads for? Another data point to consider are the huge amounts of sling projectiles made out of clay found at these sites, particularly in Greece. 110 at Sesklo, for example. Again, herders do use slings to keep predators away from their flocks, and, these people did herd goats. But why stockpile so many? Do you really need 110 sling projectiles to scare off a wolf? Finally, many stone sites have perforated stone spheres, which are interpreted by many archaeologists as mace heads. These could be a symbolic expression of power, as they still are now, or they could be used to bash someone's head in. Although all of these are open to interpretation, I personally agree with the conclusions of Curtis Runnels.
While no one class of artifact or feature can be used individually to determine the existence of prehistoric warfare, the combined evidence from these different classes of data points to violent conflict.
Alright, so you've burnt down your dad's house and built your own. You've had 10 kids and buried half of them. You've planted your crops, been on an expedition to mine flint, and bopped your neighbor on the head with a shot from your sling. Congratulations, you've lived a fulfilling Neolithic life, and now it's time to die. What happens to you now is basically a mystery, and I don't mean in the ooh spooky afterlife sense. The Neolithic farmers of southeast Europe buried very, very few people. Typically only 1 or 2 bodies are found per settlement. Almost all of these are found under floors or connected to buildings in some way. The bodies were placed in a curled up position, but there's no pattern to orientation. They weren't all facing east, for example. Slightly more women received burial than men, and no special graves were constructed. And they also contain very few grave offerings. There's no really lavish burials. This raises loads of questions, but the biggest two have got to be, what did they do to all the other bodies, and how did they decide who to bury in the settlement? Were these people the elites of society? Dare I say kings or queens or rulers of their communities? We don't know, and we don't know what happened to all the other bodies, though stray and fragmented human bones are frequently found in the settlement deposits of Tells. It's all a bit of a mystery, to be honest, but that just leaves us something else to learn. Fucking hell. You're fucking soaked here. Just want to show you guys the lengths I went to for the sake of that one King of the Hill joke. I'm stood in the bloody river, waves lapping around my ankles because of the boats going past. This isn't even the half of it. Check this out. Second of all, I've got to scramble up this bloody cliff. Whew. Took a long ass time to get down. It's gonna take me ages to get back up. What an obscene amount of effort for one joke. Obscene amount of effort. Thanks for watching. See ya.